I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. If you're a movie or book lover, you might have noticed a recent trend: strong female leads and very weak male leads. This trend goes all the way back to the garden when Adam passively watched while his wife bit into the apple. This gets played out in Matthew 14 as Herod gets played and manipulated into killing one of the greatest men of all time, John the Baptist. Listen to my exposition on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. It's been a great start to the fall. I'm really excited. I've talked about this before, but I've challenged myself to get into 90 Bible discussions this fall in 90 days. And so I'm recording this on the 13th day of September. And as of now, I've been in 12 Bible studies as of last night. And so I'm really excited, just on track, really excited to bring the word to people. And it's really fun and enjoyable. Like yesterday, I went out on campus with some of the students and Nina, my intern, and we just preached the word, shared our faith, passed out probably 150 invitations to church, invited people to study the Bible. And it was a great time. After that, I had a Bible study right there on campus at 1 o'clock. Then at 4 o'clock, I had another Bible study with a seeker. And then last night, had a baptism study with someone who wants to get baptized right away. So that was really awesome. So please keep praying for me. I'm just praying to really push myself and follow Paul's example in Acts chapter 19, where he has discussions daily in the lecture hall of Tyrannus there in Ephesus. I also want to give a shout out to Brad Schrum. Brad is a minister in Morgantown, West Virginia, and he emailed me and said, hey, I'm a listener of the podcast, and I've got someone who's moving there, and he may want to study the Bible. And so really appreciated that support. And so we exchanged numbers. I followed up with that person and studied the Bible with them. And so very encouraging. So I appreciate the listener support. And thank you, Brad, in particular, for helping me. And I'm going to do my very best to help that person. So thanks a lot. And thank you for listening to the Rob Skinner Podcast. If you feel like you're benefiting from the program, I'd like to ask you to support it with a gift. Recently, Shayla Joyner hit the button there in the show notes and supported me through Buy Me a Coffee. That's the app. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Shayla, for doing that. I really appreciated that. She just was very encouraging. Your support enables me to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches and inspire others to do the same through this podcast. So all you need to do is simply go to the show notes. There's a link there. You just click on it, and it's very easy to support the program. Matthew 14, 1 through 12, Herod's Dilemma. How do airplane crashes happen? Malcolm Gladwell describes the 1997 crash of Korean Air Flight 801. The pilot was experienced and in good health. The aircraft was in perfect working order. As the flight approached Guam, the ground proximity warning system alerted the pilot that the plane was within 500 feet of the ground. Unable to see the runway in the rain, the first officer suggested aborting the landing and circling around for another attempt. The captain, however, was slow to respond. Before the plane could recover altitude, it hit the side of nearby Nimitz Hill, killing 228 of the 254 passengers. It makes you wonder, how does that happen? If you're a nervous flyer, that's probably your worst nightmare. But it's not just plane crashes. How do people end up homeless on the street? We've got a big homeless situation here in Tucson. And they're almost on every corner asking for money and stuff. We keep like dollar bills in our central pocket there and just pass them out. But you go, how does a person get there? I'm sure it doesn't happen like overnight. But what's the process? How do people end up in terrible dysfunctional relationships or end up deeply in debt and in a terrible financial situation where they're up all night? Or how does a person end up as a slave to alcohol or drugs or porn? How does a person end up in jail or in prison? Well, this chapter offers insight in how we can end up in a situation we never dreamed would happen to us. And so we're going to start reading in Matthew chapter 14, verse 1 through 12, the death of John the Baptist. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead. That's why miraculous powers are at work in him." Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guests and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. Now, this is a sidebar in the narrative about Jesus. Its importance is in closing the loop on what had happened to John and also to foreshadow what would happen to Jesus. Matthew 17, verse 12 says, "But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." So when we see this happen to John, we realize, okay, this is what happens to a true prophet. Bad things happen, and it's exactly what's going to happen to Jesus when he gets murdered. So in verse 1 through 3, John's death is recounted in a flashback formula. If you've ever watched movies, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, a person starts talking, and then all of a sudden the screen gets kind of wavy, and then boom, you're back in time. So Herod hears about Jesus preaching the word and immediately connects Jesus to John, whom he had murdered. Herod had hosted a feast which contrasts with the feast that Jesus is going to provide in the following section in feeding the 5,000. Herod's freaking out and imagining Jesus has reappeared. This happens today with people who passed away, like sightings of Elvis or other people. Oh, you know, I just saw Elvis. He just left the house. But for Herod, he's so guilt-stricken and so agitated that when he hears about Jesus, he's like, "Oh, that must be John come back from the dead." He's definitely suffering from guilt and some type of shame. So let's take a look at an anatomy of a really bad decision. Herod and Herodias are like Ahab and Jezebel Part 2. This is like the sequel. You know, different time frame, but essentially same kind of dynamic. A passive husband and a really strong and wicked woman. Their marriage is a sham. John the Baptist had continually told Herod that it wasn't right to marry this woman, but he did it anyway. This kind of stubbornness led to one of the worst decisions on record, murdering John the Baptist. John, as you remember, is the guy that Jesus praised as the greatest prophet of all time. Now, I don't want to think about what happened to Herod when he faced Jesus at the judgment seat, but I think this points out something that commonly happens today on a smaller scale, on an everyday scale. Now, I want to specifically talk to you if you're a guy. If you're a guy listening to this, I definitely want to be talking to you. And this happens to women as well, but I want to really kind of focus in here because I think this is a guy thing in a very real way. Guys are on the run. James Dobson highlighted this about 20 years ago in a great book he wrote called Bringing Up Boys. If you have kids, if you have boys in particular, this is a must read. I mean, it's so good. He titles the chapter, Men Are Dumb, and the R is just the letter R with quotes around it, and it's placed backwards. Society is going after guys, and that's what he says in the book. They're easy targets. Now, I want you to look at recent movies like Frozen, Twisters, and other movies. I just saw Twisters the other day, and I thought that's so cool. Who's the hero in these movies? Is it the man? No. The man is often the bad guy or the lovable loser in these movies. Now listen, okay, I know if you're a woman listening, it's like, well, what's the matter with that? What's the matter with having a woman lead? Nothing at all. Okay, there's nothing at all. But what I'm saying is that this is happening in increasing measure. More and more times you're seeing this happen. Go through the bookstore, pick out a bestseller. I started a series, a very, super hot seller. And it was like, I like fantasy. And so I was reading this fantasy. I'm like, whoa, okay, woman lead, super strong. And, just the guys are kind of like foils for the woman lead. They're kind of flat in their development, but the woman is fully developed in her character. And so if you read a lot, you go, one, must be a lot of women reading. And two, there's definitely a trend out there. Chances are the hero is going to be a woman if you're reading like current novels. This is a big shift. Now, this is just a big shift over time. Now, I could be wrong. Okay, if you want to debate on this with me, no problem. If you're throwing stuff, I see a shift out there. And Herod comes across as a fool in this story. And why is that? Well, let's take it apart. First of all, he commits adultery, always a bad decision. But he marries his brother's wife while his brother is still alive. Okay, so that sparks a fight with his brother, Philip, who's across the Jordan there in the Edomite area. And so he messes with the wrong woman. Okay, Herodias. Okay, bad pick, bad selection. He makes a terrible choice. She is the boss. She's like Jezebel. She's the one who's really in charge. She's the one who organizes the hit on John the Baptist. Now, remember Jezebel? Remember Ahab? He was moping around because he couldn't get the plot of ground that was right outside the palace. And he's like, oh, dang it, I can't get it. That guy won't sell it to me. And she's like, honey, I'll take care of that for you. And so she just sets up the charges, and that guy, they kill him, basically set it up. Same thing happens here. Herod is simply a puppet in her hands. And that's really what you see there. He's very passive. He lets things happen to him. On top of that, sexuality is involved. This woman, Salome, is dancing. She's a young girl. Today it would be known as twerking. She's out there really putting on a sexual dance. So he's, this is really cringy, but he's really sexually excited here. Not a good situation. Alcohol's involved, which, like Paul said, it leads to debauchery. Peer pressure's at play. Everyone's looking at him. And so when she asks for his head, he's looking around at all these faces, wondering if he's going to hold to his word or not. And then he doesn't control his word. He makes this claim. He says, listen, I'll give you whatever you want, up to half my kingdom. Okay, really stupid thing to say. But then on top of it is pride. He doesn't back out when he's made a mistake. He allows pride to guide him down the road of destruction. He should have just said, okay, going back in perfect hindsight, hey, this is stupid. I'm being manipulated. I made a bad decision. I don't know why I said that. I'm sorry, honey. I can't do that. That's not going to be happening here tonight. Sorry about that, guys. We're not going to see John's head on a platter tonight. Instead, he does something so wrong, it's impossible to take back or to remediate. And so the momentum and the inertia from too many mistakes takes over. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in one of his books. Most air disasters don't happen after just one mistake. There's one mistake and then another, and they slowly compile, build on each other until something massive goes wrong and the plane goes down. Here's a quote from his book. In a typical crash, for example, the weather's poor, not terrible necessarily, but bad enough that the pilot feels a little bit more stressed than usual. In an overwhelming number of crashes, the plane is behind schedule, so the pilots are hurrying. In 52% of crashes, the pilot at the time of the accident has been awake for 12 hours or more, meaning that he's tired and not thinking sharply. And 44% of the time, the two pilots have never flown together before, so they're not comfortable with each other. Then the errors start, and it's not just one error. The typical accident involves 7 consecutive human errors. Now listen to that, 7 consecutive human errors. One of the pilots does something wrong that by itself is not a problem. Then one of them makes another error on top of that, which combined with the first error still does not amount to catastrophe. But then they make a third error on top of that, and then another, and another, and another, and another. And it's the combination of all those errors that leads to disaster. For men today, we can end up following the same path. We mess with the wrong woman. Instead of a godly woman, we start dating those who don't follow Jesus passionately. I see this all the time in the church. People are like, oh, I'm going to, she's a Christian. I met her on, christianmingles.com. She believes in Jesus. Okay, that's not what we're talking about here. Just because a person claims, Jesus is their Lord doesn't mean that they're a disciple. Women are like kryptonite to men. All the greats have been taken down by women. King David, King Solomon, the strongest man in the world, Samson. They were putty in the hands of women. Let's face it. If you're a guy out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is the area where we are weakest. Then we get passive. We let the woman lead us instead of leading as God desires and designed. Go to many churches today, and who do you find? Women. Lots of women. Maybe 70% of the attendance is women. Where are the guys? They're at home. They're worshiping at St. Mattresses or St. Madden's, watching football, NFL on Sundays. We don't stand up and do what's right. Slowly, as men, we get led to a place that we can't get out of. Then on top of that, sexuality, porn, impurity, temptation weakens us, reduces our ability to stand up and make moral stands because we already know we're compromised. We've got an arrow in our side, and it's tough because we know we've already compromised. Alcohol adds to it. Paul says, don't get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Alcohol, although not prohibited in the Bible, it can lead to bad decisions. Okay? Paul says that. He says, don't get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Got to be careful. And so when it's combined with sexuality, when it's combined with a passive character, boy, terrible things can happen. Then there's peer pressure. Once we allow our friends or family to guide our decision-making, it's nearly impossible to make changes. We feel trapped. Then we pile on top of that rash words. We say things and make promises that are foolish. Then we get held to those stupid words. And then pride is the final nail in the coffin. Pride keeps us from making a change when we know we are way off course. Instead of backing out, being humble, we plunge on into destruction. I remember I was counting the costs with a young man and asked him, hey, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing you if you become a Christian? And if Satan wanted to take you out spiritually, what do you think he'd do? The man answered so quickly. He just said, send a woman into my life. Well, a few months later, this man started dating a woman. He abandoned his relationship with Christ and left. I'm just like, he already knew it. He already saw it coming. He knew exactly what Satan would throw at him, but even having his eyes wide open, he still fell for it. He knew it in advance and still fell. So here's the challenge. What situation are you caught in? Do you feel trapped? Closed in, boxed in with limited options? That's a sign you may be stuck in Herod's dilemma. And we can feel that way when it comes to finances, when it comes to purity, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to any type of sin or difficulty. We feel trapped. And that's a sign that we're wrestling with these things that Herod was dealing with. I know Herod didn't want to kill this guy. Of course, he did at times. But it says in other passages that he respected him. He knew he was a prophet. So he knew it's not the right thing to do to kill him, although at times he felt like he wanted to because of his outspokenness. But some of us are falling right into Herod's dilemma. We're involved with the wrong woman or the wrong man. We're drifting away from God, passively allowing it to happen. We see it happening, but we're doing nothing about it. Sexuality, alcohol may be contributing toward it. We've said things that were stupid, and now we're afraid of making a change and looking foolish, so we're stuck in a situation of our own making. If you want to be strong, you have to stand up, step back, and look at your situation with fresh eyes. Renounce the words you've spoken. break up with the wrong woman or the wrong man and turn back toward God. Get some help. Gladwell goes on to say, these 7 errors, furthermore, are rarely problems of knowledge or flying skill. It's not that the pilot has to negotiate some critical technical maneuver and fails. The kinds of errors that cause plane crashes are invariably errors of teamwork and communication. One pilot knows something important and somehow doesn't tell the other pilot. One pilot does something wrong and the other pilot doesn't catch the error. The co-pilot in this example of this Korean Airlines crash told the pilot they were too low, but the pilot refused to listen. But the problem is the co-pilot, because he was younger than the pilot, didn't just stand up and say, hey, pull up. We are way too low. Instead, he just gave some indirect suggestions. Hey, maybe we're just a little too low here. Herod had no one in his life. He didn't have a co-pilot. If you're a disciple, if you're a Christian, and you need help, you can reach out for help. Unfortunately, when we get into bad situations, we often try to hide it because we're ashamed, we feel trapped and boxed in, and we don't want to let other people know that we are really in trouble. We keep it from others. We get prideful. That's where discipling can make all the difference. Are you in a discipling relationship with someone? Are you talking to someone about what's really happening in your life? Some of us are like, oh no, that's too old school. Listen, it is so wise to have a discipling relationship with somebody in your life. In fact, I would just say you're absolutely foolish if you are disregarding discipleship. One spiritual talk with another disciple can often make all the difference, whether you're a man or a woman. Don't be like Herod. Don't get caught in Herod's dilemma. He was stubborn. He was isolated. He was compounding mistakes until he finally crashed and burned and committed the worst sin imaginable. Thanks for listening. Here's how you can help support the program. First, let your friends know about the podcast. Secondly, read and review one of my books, How to Plant and Grow a Church, or Courage, How to Make This Life Count. You can find either one of them on Amazon.com. Support the program with a gift today. The link is in the show notes, because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no-regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.